Hi everyone, I did my research paper on the Dutch colonization in New York. So I've lived in New York my entire life. I was just curious to see how it became the place that it is today. I began my research talking about Henry Hudson and how he was the first one to anchor in New York Bay. He was serving for the Dutch East India Company in 1609, and that he was looking for a northern passage to India. However, that wasn't the case, and he wound up finding and anchoring in the New York Bay instead. So he discovered a lot of good farmland and a lot of valuable resources. So when he went back, he wound up publishing a testimony basically describing everything that he saw. And that's when the Dutch claimed this region actually. So it became New Netherland. So New York used to be New Netherland. I then went on to talk about the Dutch West India Company. So that was created in 1621. It was basically an attempt to end all private trading in the Western Hemisphere. It was a monopoly and set up trading posts along the west coast of Africa, what is now Brazil, Caribbean, and along the Hudson River. So along with that, I wound up talking about how the Dutch West India Company actually began to govern the new colony of New Netherland. The system was simple. There was a director and a council of officers. The directors and the governor had to agree on the policies, and when they were agreed upon, the policies needed to get approval back in Amsterdam before becoming an official policy, and that could take months. So the system, although it was simple, it was not very efficient. The colony of New Netherland was established by the Dutch West India Company in 1624. It eventually grew to include all of present-day New York City, parts of Long Island, Connecticut, and New Jersey. There was a successful settlement that the Dutch had, and it was called New Amsterdam, which is now where the southern tip of Manhattan is. The Dutch governor at the time was Peter Minuit, and he formally bought Manhattan from a local tribe to legitimize the Dutch claims to New Amsterdam. And the first permanent Dutch settlement in New Netherland was Fort Orange, and that was otherwise known as today Albany. And that was to replace Fort Nassau in 1624. Fort Nassau was the first attempt at a settlement in North America for the Dutch, and it wound up actually being abandoned in 1617 due to a lot of flooding. So it was unable to sustain a community. I talked about the relationship between Indians and the Dutch because they had to coexist with each other. They both kind of had a mutual agreement that they were trading partners, and that was it. The Dutch gave the Indians guns when the Indians gave the Dutch furs, so they just traded with each other. The problem between the Dutch and the Indians came when the Indians felt like the purchasing of the land from the Dutch was just temporary, whereas the Dutch intended on the sales being final because they wanted to settle there. So that's when the conflict started to happen. Then on September 8th, 1664, the Dutch officially turned over the colony of New Netherland to England. And in 1667, the Dutch separated the colony into two parts. One became New York and the other one became New Jersey. New York was named after the Duke of York, the king's brother. So basically what I found out was that the Dutch has a lot of influence on what New York is today. There's a lot of prominent Americans that are direct descendants of Dutch settlers in New York. For example, the former presidents, Martin Van Buren, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Thomas Edison. They also were the first to bring the Christian Reformed Church, along with religion. There were other things like the cigar and tobacco industry, ice skating, bowling, and then my favorite, pancakes and waffles. So I hope you guys enjoyed my video and learned a lot.